Welcome to the 2002 Lexus LS430. Believe it or not, I am so excited to be behind the wheel of one of these Japanese luxury sedans right now. Just because this isn't a performance car doesn't mean it's not an extremely interesting buy in today's market. The owner, Peter, bought this for precisely the reason I've been eyeing these from afar for so long. He picked this car up with 200,000 miles on the odometer recently for $3,000. Yes, this car might be over 2 decades old, but at the end of the day, this was the pinnacle of luxury from the Lexus brand not that long ago. So what I want to explore today is, how does this car actually drive? How does it stack up compared to luxury cars of 2024? And for $3,000, which is probably something like 4% of its original MSRP, might this just be the bargain of the decade? So we're powered by a 4.3-liter naturally aspirated Toyota V8, the 3UZ, and it makes 290 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. Compared to the first-gen LS, which used a similar V8, this makes the same peak horsepower but more torque and at a lower RPM. This car has double wishbone suspension front and rear. It weighs around 4,000 pounds. We have hydraulic power steering. And this is actually not one of the upper trims of the LS430, meaning we don't get the full leather and we don't get the ventilated seats, although we do get heated seats as standard. Also, not being a sport package, this does not have the upgraded suspension. But even this base LS430 is very well appointed. To my surprise, this actually has a touchscreen navigation system, which I'll show you. Power, tilting, and telescoping steering wheel. I love the wood trim, very old school, but very classy at the same time. Very nice moonroof, power adjustable seats, tons of rear leg room. I sat back there earlier and at 5'7", I can basically almost fully extend my legs. But let's get this thing fired up and see how it drives. 200,000 miles, and the owner Peter mentioned that the only issues he's found, well, besides this tail lamp failure, is that the power, tilt, and telescope steering wheel, the telescoping works fine, but the tilt is broken. And he mentioned 1 or 2 other very minor electrical issues. But overall, the car mechanically, as I'm told, is rock solid. These engines and 5-speed automatics should be bulletproof. I've seen these cars with as many as 600,000 miles. Here's the touchscreen navigation. It's crazy to me that this actually works pretty well. The touchscreen is pretty responsive. The audio system sounds pretty good. Look at this. I just noticed that the vents are automatically moving left to right. Pretty cavernous center console here. And these cup holders stow away just like that. They're a little flimsy feeling, but I do appreciate the fact that you can hide them when you don't need them. There's buttons here where you can actually adjust the passenger seat. Let's get this thing going here. We'll put it into drive. It's a 5-speed automatic. No manual shifting unless you literally just move between the gates here. And this switch right here, we can put it into power mode, which adjusts the transmission shift logic, apparently. All right, let's see what this car actually feels like in the lower gears. We'll put it into 3. Actually not bad. 290 horsepower is a reasonable amount of power with 320 pound-feet of torque. That's the real number that you should be looking at when buying a car like this. And it makes that peak torque, I think, at just over 3,000 RPM. This will rev to a little over 6. The first thing I'm noticing, extremely slow and wallowy steering. The on-center feel, well, it's basically non-existent. Look at that. You can turn the steering wheel about 10-15 degrees in either direction, and the front tires don't do squat. And that is definitely a trait of older luxury cars like this one that I'm not a fan of. With newer luxury cars, even though they're just as comfortable and refined, if not more so, as they should be 2 decades later, the steering gives you a lot more confidence. So definitely not my favorite part of this car. But I do like the way this car rides. Ultra compliant suspension. This thing's sitting on aftermarket 19-inch TSW wheels. Peter mentioned that it came with 16s, but he picked up these 19-inch TSWs for cheap just so he could run some all-season tires. But the ride quality, he mentioned, definitely was significantly better with the OEM wheels. But even with the 19s, this thing rides extraordinarily well. Tons of body roll, but it soaks up every bump. You barely even feel them. The brake pedal actually feels pretty decent, not as soft as the steering in terms of the initial response when you push that pedal down. There is a little bit of a shimmy from the steering wheel. These wheels probably just need a balance. This engine actually builds power pretty nicely in the top end. It doesn't have as much low-end torque as I actually expected. The way it gets off the line from about 1,000 to 3,000 RPM, it almost is underwhelming. But then once you hit about 4,000, the engine actually wakes up quite a bit. The way this car isolates you from the road is really, really impressive. Barely any wind noise. There is a little bit of a creaking sound. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but it's very subtle. Oh yeah, this transmission showing signs of age. It takes a couple of seconds to downshift once you floor it. Let's throw this into 3. Once the steering is loaded up, it gives you a little bit of feedback, being a hydraulic rack. But ultimately, the steering is definitely the weak point of this car in terms of driving dynamics. It inspires not much confidence at all. I've driven cars with worse steering racks, but most of those were even older than this, like from the 80s or earlier. Oh yeah, some understeer there. But yeah, steering in cars from the 90s and 2000s, hydraulic racks, maybe not quite as precise on center as a modern EPS, but they gave you so much more feedback than a modern EPS without the insane wallowiness of cars from the 80s and early 90s, I would say. This car, being a luxury car, even though it's from the early 2000s, it does remind me of those 80s and 90s floppy and loose steering racks. Not the most exhilarating car to drive on a downhill canyon road, but you know what? I am loving this experience. It is just so refined, so comfortable. Granted, these seats don't really hold me in when I'm trying to corner hard, but that's not the point. They're absolute sofas. The back seat especially, so comfortable. The backrest allows me to sink into it by just the right amount. And this thing is actually holding its own on the downhill. No signs of brake fade. The car is cornering just fine. There's a lot of body roll, but it's not doing anything unpredictable. It just feels like a really solidly built car. 4,000 pound curb weight. I'm actually surprised it's not a bit heavier. 4,000 pounds nowadays. I mean, even a 5 Series is way, way heavier than this. An M3 all-wheel drive is pretty much knocking at the door of 4,000 pounds. Oh yeah, soaking up all the bumps, big and small. This car can just eat up the road, eat up miles like nobody's business. Is this the most impressive luxury car ever? No. Maybe even for 2002 standards it wasn't at the absolute pinnacle, but who cares? What matters now is that you can pick these up for dirt cheap. $3,000, I will say, is a little bit of an anomaly. Even Peter admitted that he got what he thinks is a steal on this thing. But I did a little bit of research, and you can pick up an 02, 03, 04 with, say, 100 to 150,000 miles for less than $10,000. There are many examples in the $5,000 to $6,000 range even. And then if you want to get a nicer example, like an 05 or 06 with, let's say, 50,000 miles, you're looking at roughly $15,000, give or take. And while that is a lot more than $3,000, you're getting a low mileage, mechanically solid car that is extremely comfortable and will last you another 500,000 miles. So the value proposition in some ways is still there for those lower mileage, newer examples. I think if it were me, I'd go for an earlier model year, 02 or 03, and try to aim for that sub $10,000 price point. I think that might honestly be the sweet spot, because then chances are the car won't need quite as much in terms of maintenance. I mean, that's more dependent on the previous owners than anything. But for me, I've never owned a car with 200,000 miles or more. So something about that 200,000 mile mark just makes me feel a little bit uneasy. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if it had like 130 to 140. Let me know what you think about this generation of Lexus LS. Is it actually a bargain at sub $10,000? Are there even better executive sedan experiences that can be had for less money? And how about the later generations of LS? I saw a 2019 listed yesterday with something like 70 or 80,000 miles for $37,000. Why are these cars depreciating so quickly? I understand why the older S-classes and 7 Series and Audi A8s depreciate so quickly, because they're not known to stand up to the test of time, but these Lexuses are. So why are these depreciating just as fast? Let me know down in the comments. A big shout out to Peter again. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.